Oh, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Lloyd Musser. Lloyd has been a forester with the United States Forest Service for 36 years, and he spent 25 years working for the Mount Hood National Forest. And in 2005, Lloyd became the curator of the Mount Hood Cultural Center and Museum. He has quite an interest in history, and that spilled over into the Steiner cabins. I think I said 2001 he became the curator. And in 2005 he began to document the Steiner cabins built by Henry and his sons John and Fred. And that continues to this day. As a matter of fact, he says he's documented about 100 Steiner cabins, and that process still continues, as he pointed out to me earlier. When I began working on an application for historic recognition of the Fogelbo house on the National Register, one of the first persons I thought of and turned to, besides Ross Fogelquist, who's in the audience, was Lloyd Musser. So I'm very excited that he could come tonight and share with you his knowledge and his expertise of the Steiner cabins.
Thank you, Grady. I'm glad to be here tonight. I wasn't expecting this many people to be interested. Usually I do the Steiner lecture at the museum in Government Camp. We have 20, 30 people sit around and have a little chat, but this is a high productions thing here. We'll see what goes on here. So I'm going to tell you tonight about the Steiner family, and then we'll end up talking about their work and their cabins and everything. So Henry came to America when he was about 4 or 5 years old. His family immigrated. They were sent for because over by Oregon City, there's a place called Beaver Creek. They needed a Sunday school teacher, so they asked his dad to immigrate to America and come and be their Sunday school teacher. So he came on a ship to New York and then came across the United States on a train. He was met in Oregon City by a guy named Moki, and took him out of Beaver Creek, put him on a little 5-acre farm there, and that's where he grew up. He didn't want to be a pig farmer, so he started getting involved with construction. And he built wing dams and bridges. In fact, how he got to Mount Hood. He was hired to do a bridge at Arowana, and while he's there, somehow he decided to build log cabins. He built his first log cabin right outside of Brightwood there in 1925. And moved his family to Brightwood and never left. Interesting though, he never had a log cabin. He lived in a rental house his whole life. He married this lady, Molly. They had 12 kids in 17 years. And like Greg said, he built, we're up to 100, and there's still some more out there, I'm sure, cabins and 2 churches during his life. He died early in 53. It's really a kind of a sad story. By that time, he was getting a little dementia, but he was getting around. He'd like to walk over to the logging shop and talk to the boys over to the logging shop. And one day he went for that walk and never came back. And to get to that logging shop, he had to walk across the bridge of the Sandy River. When he didn't come home, they figured he fell in the river maybe. So his son, Fred, got a raft, and we're talking 53. Yeah, probably wasn't a very good raft, very big. Went down the Sandy River and flipped the raft over and died. His dad was found a couple weeks later. He went past the logging shop and went up on a hill where he built the first cabin up there, and where he liked to go to find character wood, these trees that were bent that he liked to use in his houses. And he set down a log up there and passed away. That's the beginning of Henry. Now let's talk about cabins. I like this exhibit that the girls put together here, Swedish log cabins. I hadn't really thought about it, but it's true. The first cabins built in America were built by Swedes. And log cabins have a long, long history in Europe and in America. And by the time the immigrants came to Oregon and started building their first homes for log cabins, by that time people in the East were building very elaborate. They weren't building log cabins so much for homes anymore, but people like the Rockefellers and the Richfields and stuff were building these log lodges, I call them, huge places built out of logs, very ornate. And but in America, here in the West, the immigrants first put together some crude log cabins, and then but by the time Henry come along, log cabins were going out of style. The West was settled, there's sawmills, lumber became available, and nobody was building log cabins much when Henry started building log cabins. And one of the reasons he started building log cabins was an interesting thing that happened. The Forest Service decided that they had to do something to get more people to utilize the forest. And when they acted, it not only impacted the forest, but impacted the land around. So in the early 20s, the Forest Service decided that one of the ways to get more people to enjoy the Mount Hood National Forest was to provide overnight housing. And one of the ways they wanted to do that was create these summer home lots. You could lease the land for a summer home and build your own cabin there. You didn't own the land, but you owned the cabin, you paid the government a fee every year. Well, private enterprise saw that going on, and so they subdivided everything from Government Camp all the way to Alder Creek, which is about halfway to Sandy, and to create thousands of lots that were anywhere from 50 by 100, some as small as 50 by 50 feet. So in the next few years, thousands of homes, second homes grew up there. So Henry hit this just right. In 25, he built the first one there in Brightwood, and for the next 20, 30 years, full-time business. He never did anything else, never built another bridge, never built another warehouse, just built log cabins. And the other things the Forest Service did, they created 600 summer home lots, and there were thousands of private building lots. You don't really realize that when you drive up Highway 26 to Mount Hood. You see some cabins along the road, but there are dozens and hundreds of them back in the woods, all those little roads going back in there. Just from Road Denner to the base of Laurel Hill, when you start climbing Mount Hood, there's 600 of those Forest Service summer homes there. So Henry built both private homes and summer homes. This is the first house he built. It doesn't look as elaborate and nice and has some ornate as some of the later ones, but it was his first one. It's still standing. And he got up there, but like I said, going up there to build a bridge. And one of the things that's funny is I have the contract for that bridge with the county. And I guess it was known by that time already to be a scrounge. So it says right in the contract, you will not use materials found on site. You will buy all the materials and bring them in to build a bridge. Because Henry would, and later when he's building these homes on these private lots, if there was a tree or rock he needed within a couple hundred feet of the house, he'd use it unless you told him otherwise. That's how frugal he was. He wasn't stealing or anything. He was just being frugal. So this is the cabin that wouldn't fade away. Like Greg said, we formed a museum in 2001. And in 2005, Nancy Dougherty, that owned this cabin, came to us and said, you guys need to document the Steiner cabins. She owned a Steiner cabin. I knew that. And I said, what do you mean, you guys? I said, how about you? Well, she said, I don't know what to do. So I said, I'll help you. We'll do that. So we started inventorying Steiner cabins. And this cabin she bought, she was a single school teacher with a couple of kids, needed housing. She found a log cabin for sale. Wiring was bad, plumbing was bad. Furniture had been thrown out in a snowbank. She bought it, and over the years she saved that cabin, and now it's the pride and joy of the community. Henry also built a couple of churches. This is the Catholic church he built, and they built, this was a contract job. He also built another church that was a community effort later. Everybody got together and built this church. This church sat where the only stoplight in Welch's is, the shopping center, sat right in where the highway is now, had to be moved. So it was moved, and it's now on private property and just been finished being fully restored and functioning as a meeting place, wedding chapel, or whatever. And we're going to have it on tour this year. First time we've had it on tour because Passive hadn't been ready to be on tour. This is the other log church he built. It's all logs, subject to a couple of fires over time now. Now it's a Lutheran church, and none of the log features are included in it. But it was quite an undertaking there. There are some knockoffs. Interesting story. We've been inventorying these cabins, and sometimes even, one time I had a grant, and we had an architect doing the inventory. She got fooled, I got fooled, and we figured it all out now. Henry was so congenial. He could say no to anybody. He couldn't say no to anybody. He would help them. So the cabin on the right here, he was building 2 summer homes, and there was an empty lot in between. And the guy that owned that lot wanted to build a house too, but he didn't know how to do it. He didn't have the money to hire Henry, so he started out by coming up on the weekend. Whatever Henry did through the week, he would do it on the weekend, try to replicate. And finally Henry said, oh, he messed that up and stuff, so I'll help you. So he helped this guy build this cabin, but the guy didn't want to spend time doing any of the fancy stuff. He didn't want to go find a bent log to make a railing. He didn't want to whittle a doorknob out of a knob. And so it looks like a Steiner from the outside, but if you look close, it doesn't have any of the trademark things that Henry did. The other one, the faux Steiner, I call it, they did a pretty good job, and Henry actually advised them too. They were friends of his. But all of Henry's cabins were 8 foot tall, pretty standard stuff. This one is 7.5 feet, and some of it, and 7 feet ceilings in the other part. And it's just like, I walked in there the first time, I said, something doesn't feel right. Well, they saved some money and time by only making the ceiling 7 foot high. John was taken out of school when he was 16, said, you've had enough school and you're going to go and work for your dad now. And at the same time, Fred was taken out. He was 14. And so John sort of, at the time, Henry was hiring local stonemasons to build their fireplaces. And in those days, Fred and John worked for their dad 5.5 days a week. You get off noon Saturday, and Sunday was your free day. And I don't think Henry gave him very much spending money, because what does a 16-year-old boy need any money for? I'm feeding him at home, got a bed, he don't need any money. So John started building fireplaces for other people on Sunday, on his day off, a little beer money. And if you track his work, his early work is a little bit crude, but as he got older and got better, he did pretty good. And, some masons, seems like every mason has their own kind of mortar joints they make. Some of the best ones at Mount Hood are by the name of Henry Pinner. He used the back of a tool, turn it over so it has these little beads all around all the joints. John, he's so practical. He said, there's no point in that. I just take my fingers and take that crack and fix it up, to the point that his 2 fingers were worn off and pointed. So after that, John did all the fireplaces on Steiner cabins. And we could track and look at a fireplace and see who built it. Henry had a couple of styles of logs. He had the horizontal logs with traditional Lincoln log cabin, what you think about. He had vertical log cabins. And We have John on a recording at his 91st birthday party, and people were asking him questions about their cabins. Somebody asked about vertical logs, and you could hear him pretty plain say, never built a vertical log home. Turns out, in fact, what he was saying is don't build logs vertically, because when they rot out at the bottom, like they invariably will, you can't take the bottom log out and replace it. But people said, well, then John must have not built this house because it's got vertical logs. No, they built them. That was Henry's idea. But John was saying, don't do it because it's not a good idea. And then he had another kind that we called the board and batten. He'd make a frame out of 2x4s, and then he'd take these rough sawn 12 by 1 inch boards, put them on vertically on the inside, and on the outside stagger them, and then put a little thin piece of wood or a half round little log over that crack, board and batten. But inside, you got a Steiner fireplace, Steiner log rafters, and all details like things in the gable and stuff. But then you had a combination where horizontal logs, vertical logs. Then on the other end of this cabin, there'd be shakes up in the gable. For a long time, I always wondered where John Henry got his shakes and cedar shingles. We just found out recently that his brother, Charles, was over, had a cedar shake mill in Beaver Creek. And we actually got some shakes that somebody took off a house that says Charlie Steiner Brothers, Beaver Creek. So that mystery was solved. In those days, there were shingle mills all over, just little things all over. And they didn't put their name on a lot of stuff. But we were glad to find out. That just brings the point that Henry was a very family man. So if his brother was making shakes, he would buy them there, even if he had to go to Beaver Creek to get them. Whenever any of his brothers, cousins, relatives were out of work, he had work for them, doing something on the cabins. So Henry had some design principles, and that's how we're able to track these cabins and attribute them to being built by Henry and his family. Today, in fact, I live in Happy Valley, and my county ordinance says my house has to face the street. I have to have a entry door facing the street, and they didn't have those rules in the days when Henry was building houses. So he would orient the cabin so it had the best view. So a lot of these cabins, you drive up to them on the road and park, you can't figure out where the front door is because it's around the back where the mountain view is. He didn't care about where the street was. He would orient the cabin. And, today we would line them up with the front lines. He had them every which direction so they have a good view. And he fit them to lay the land. There's a few of them that have underground garages. And he put them on a knoll so he didn't have to excavate a lot to get an entryway into them. We always use logs less than 12 inches in diameter. A couple of reasons for that. One is 12-inch logs, two good men can hustle around, move logs. And two, all that land from the end of the 4-lane at Welch's had been logged over for railroad ties, and they can't use a tree less than 11 inches diameter. So you could go buy those trees, buy a whole tree for $1. And that's where he got the logs. When there wasn't logs on the property that he was building on to build, he'd get them from down there. And that's, I don't know where the logs came from for Fogelbo, but they might have come from there. He liked to use the raw materials on site, building those fireplaces and foundations. Probably didn't put most of them on a foundation. Most of them just set on a rock or two and a couple of stumps. But he'd pick up the rocks right around there. It wasn't, today we bring in a dump truck to dump off a load of rocks and bring in a pile of lumber. He liked to get the stuff right on site. He didn't like to purchase anything he could make. And we'll demonstrate that a little later when we talk about doors. And it included his signature architectural features. Those features are sun rays or sunbursts. Some people call them wagon wheels in the gables. And a lot of them have those. He liked to find character wood for porch posts. anybody go get a round post and put it in there. He'd go spend time. John said Henry didn't spend a lot of time working on the cabins. If he was around, he was out in the woods looking for character logs to drag back, and he'd drag back a whole crooked log and say, "Here, Johnny, here's your handrail." John said, then I had to figure out how to make it work. This cabin here has a bench and a building this forked Y for a post there. There's one on the left over there is your right-hand side. I identified this as a Steiner cabin based on that character log as a split log forked tree there used. Only Henry would do that. Nobody else would do that. This lady bought this house out of bankruptcy, bank sale, and it turned out we'd driven past there lots of times, but there was a big modern garage in front of this house, and we couldn't see it. Once you got there, there's all kinds of Steiner features on it. But I said nobody else would do that kind of character log on a porch post but Henry. That log is still there. It's been there for 85 years. This is the second house he built on Mount Hood. Doors. A lot of people identify Steiner cabins by the doors, but you always do that because before 1930, he was buying doors. But in 1930, he got tired of buying doors, so he started making his own. And what he would do, he'd find a crooked tree that, tree starts out growing on a slope, and bend comes out of the ground, and then turns and goes up. He'd find those logs, cut them in half, bookend them to make a door, and put the glass in there and everything. That turns out to be, you see one of these doors, it's Steiner cabin, although I know of two doors that are on cabins that aren't Steiners that I don't know where they got the doors from. They didn't make them, but Henry made them, but they picked them up someplace. Split log doors. Before mid-1930, he was buying stock doors, either the 15-panel lights or there's 10-panel lights. And this is a good example of a cabin that, until we started documenting Steiner, some people didn't know what they had. Some people thought they were cheap, and they'd take and remodel them. I got called to go look at this cabin by a real estate lady that something just told her what the people were telling her about it didn't quite jive. She wanted me to come look at it, so I went and looked at it, pulled up to it. I said, "No, that's not a Steiner. It's got shake siding, and it's just, I don't see any logs. It's not a Steiner. There's no porch posts on there or anything." And that was before I knew about the doors. So we go inside through the back door, through the kitchen. It's all sheetrock and modern cabinets. Turn the corner and go in a room, front room, there's a fireplace. Oh, it's a real fireplace. This is a Steiner fireplace, maybe a Piner. Something's going on here. I turn around. Oh, here's a stair railing going upstairs. Whoa, this gets more interesting. So we went through that whole house, and they had done such a good job of disguising it. You couldn't see in the closet or any place any logs, but it was a Steiner underneath. There's a log cabin underneath there with log rafters and everything, but they covered it all on the outside with cedar shakes, covered it all on the inside with sheetrock, and the only thing was showing was that door, fireplace, and a stairway casing. And the staircase he made steps by splitting an 8-inch log in half, used the half-round log for steps. They were there very definitely. So here's what not to do with a Steiner cabin. There's another one that a lady called me, showed me to come look at her cabin, and she told me right up front, "It's a Steiner, I just is, And I walked in and I said, "How come you don't have a fireplace?" "Oh, I pulled that off, put that big window in there because it was dark in here." Oh, what happened to you don't have a crooked, curvy stair railing?" "No, I got rid of that because it was all crooked. I like this straight board here." And I said, "What's this thing on top of this?" "Well, you couldn't stand up upstairs, so I put a big dormer on it." I said, "It's not. It may be a Steiner, but I'm not going to certify it as a Steiner because I don't want you to sell it as a Steiner." So we haven't heard that story again lately. Here's some more architectural features that if you see these things, you know for sure it's a Steiner. Steiner made his own doorknobs. That's a little sapling, 6 foot, 5 foot tree, cut it off. Those are the branches, whittle it down, put it through there, and you put a knob on it and you turn it and it lifts that latch on the other side there. So the way you lock it up on the inside is put a peg in there so nobody can lift that lever up. Here's the stairwells I've been talking about. These are really, I haven't seen anybody ever doing these other than Henry Steiner. These are trees. He didn't have a steam box. He couldn't bend wood. These are trees he found in the woods growing naturally, curving and crooked. And bring them back, and like I said, give them to John, say, here's your stairwell. And I said, how am I supposed to put that together, you know? But he did. They're all over the place. And see the half-round steps there? Those are 8-inch logs cut in half. And smaller posts put in there. It's interesting how he cut those. He had a little saw. He'd jack up his car, put a belt around the back tire and to a saw, run it through there. He'd cut these steps that way, and he cut quarter round. He didn't do, we'll talk about in a minute, chinking like normally you think about cabins with plaster and mud, cement, and for chinking. He put quarter round in there. He'd take a 3-inch tree, run through that saw, cut it into quarters, and then nail it in with big nails, inside and outside. He still had all his fingers. He liked to do interior bridges. Many Steiner cabins, the bigger ones, have a bridge going across the living room, and sometimes they're up against a wall. They're like a balcony, exposed balcony. This one on this side is manzanita roots and shrubs. Imagine peeling all the bark off of those things and cleaning them up and fitting them in there to make a railing. Just phenomenal work. Here's the quarter round chinking. See, normally you would see white plaster, some kind in there, always falling out and stuff. Henry would, first of all, he fit the logs tight, so he didn't need much. Then he cut this quarter round, drive them in there, put a 10-penny nail every foot or so he needed just to draw them in there tight. Drip line. If a Steiner cabin hasn't been modified, water dripping off the roof will not land on the bottom log. If somebody modify them, and they do quite often, the ends get a little, the logs on the ends of the roof line get a little rotten, so they cut off 6 inches. And when they put a new roof on, when that happens, the water starts dripping on the bottom log, then your bottom log rots out. Garages, except for most are very narrow. Model T, Model A fit in there, but that's about it. A lot of garages are gone because nobody appreciated them. Some of them have been saved. And it's interesting where the garages were. The garages were always where the road was, right off the road out there. No matter where the house was on the lot, the garage would be over in the corner just off the road. Furniture. Henry made, or his men made furniture. He would find a lot of tables. He'd find really half-wood-shaped log, cut it in half, and make these. This was probably table probably made out of flooring. And there's a neat story about these tables. Not too long ago, I got a call from an antique dealer, said she had a estate sale in northwest Portland, and it had a Steiner table in there, and she wanted to know, she didn't think it would go very good at the sale because everything else was all modern stuff. If I knew anybody that wanted to buy it or something, she didn't want to let it go for nothing if somebody. And I said, no, I don't know. We're a museum, we'd take it, but I'm not going to buy it. I don't know anybody else who would. I put a note out to Steiner owners. Nobody did. Antique shop downtown. The antique shop was going out of business, so he called me and he said, that table's down there. Sure wish somebody do something with it. I said, where did it come from anyway? How did you end up with it? Well, my dad took it out of a cabin we used to have on the mountain. Oh, well, where was the cabin? What cabin was it? Oh, I don't know. I was just a little kid. oh, well, if you could find out where that cabin is, maybe we could do something. So a couple weeks later, he said, I went for a drive with my buddy. I think I found the house. He told me where it was. I said, I know the owners. I called up the owners. They made a deal. That cabin, 50 years later, went back where it was started from. And the owners were very happy to do that. He'd build, other than the tables, which there's a lot of them, he'd build odd pieces, little tables like this, and then tables. Some cabins still have the original sink drain boards made out of stuff that Henry built.